We're all set.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your snowy afternoon to join us on this important task. Moving right through to the agenda, we have an agenda published. Is there any additions anyone wishes to make? If not, I would entertain a motion, a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by David.
Seconded by Sally.
Thank you, Sally. All in favor?
Councillor Giguere?
Yes.
Councillor Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wharton?
Yes.
Councillor Ketchaba?
Yes.
Heather? Yes. 5-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Moving on then with the approval of the minutes. Everyone has had opportunity to peruse them. If there are no errors or omissions, I would entertain a mover and the seconder to adopt and approve.
Giguere, I'll move.
Thank you, Dominique.
Seconded.
Thank you, David. All in favor?
Councillor Giguere?
Yes.
Councillor Martin?
Yes.
Warden Mennel?
Yes.
Councillor Ketchaba?
Yes.
Heather Dirks? Yes. 5-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Next, I'll ask for any disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none, noted. Okay, before we go on with the 2020 Community Grant Program requests, I want to take a moment to poll the members that we all agree that we are, I guess you could say, judging the applicants based on the eligibility criteria as set out in the 2021 Community Grant Festivals and Community Services guidelines. Is that a fair assessment?
Just a comment on that, Ed. This is the first year in my knowledge that we've ever had a service club apply for a grant. Certainly I scored them fairly high because I agree with everything they're doing, but I'm just a little afraid if we open this up to service clubs, and every municipality's got 7 or 8 of them, we could be flooded going forward with service clubs request. And basically service clubs are doing the same thing we're doing. We're giving them money so they could disperse it. It would make more sense if who's ever getting the recipients applied for the grant, and then we have the decision over it. So I'm a little concerned over the service clubs having entry into our grant program.
So noted. Okay, thank you for those comments. Are there any other comments, or again, are we judging these based on the eligibility criteria that we established in the grant application package? I just want to make the ground rules established.
I agree that that's how I'm judging.
Okay, Dominique?
Yes, I agree. I did have a similar concern to the warden, but I reflected that in my scoring personally, in terms of needs and impact. But I agree that the criteria we set out should apply.
Okay, thank you. Heather? Okay, I also agree with that, and I think we've covered off the committee members. So with having said that, then Julie, when we go through the community grant program requests, and I assume the PowerPoint you're going to make the presentation on, would it be a fair method that with each application we stop and have, I guess, some comments? Because I've already identified in my own mind 3 applications that I just don't support.
Certainly.
Okay, so having said that, shall we then move forward with the presentation?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to committee members. I just want to take a quick moment and acknowledge the great support from the Legislative Services team who pulled this information together for the committee very quickly And we also appreciate the committee's quick scoring of the applications. I know it involved some weekend work for you. I just wanted to note that overall, the grant requests exceeded the proposed grant allocations by $45,209. And with that, we'll share a presentation. Great. So the first slide indicates just a summary of committee priorities. And one of the primary reasons why the overall committee grant process was overhauled was to enhance accountability and transparency when allocating any grant funds. So in order to do so, the Rural Initiatives and Planning Advisory Committee members independently scored community grant proposals using a set of standardized County Council approved scoring matrices. Those were submitted to staff, and we averaged the scores and assigned some preliminary budgets for each of the categories, which will be reviewed today. And the committee will allocate funds for the 2021 community grants in a fair and proportionate way, giving consideration to a weighted approach that we are proposing that considers merit and need, incorporates committee scores, and the committee will then make recommendations to County Council, who will ultimately approve the grant allocations. So the available budget for 2021 grant allocations, $66,300. And then we took out the signage grant for $300 because that amount can't be reduced. It's a fixed amount that is required to install the signage. And each category was assigned a proposed budget based on percentage of total asks. So you'll see that community services, the total ask was $28,469, which is 26% of the total ask of $111,219. So the proposed budget for community services, $16,894. Festivals and events, we received $72,750 in ask, which is 65% of the total. And the proposed budget is $43,172. For seed events, we received a $10,000 ask, which is 9% of the total ask for all categories, for which the proposed budget is $5,934,000. You'll see that the proposed budget does total $66,000 and does not include the signage grant for $300. So the approach to allocations, committee members again scored each of the categories using the matrices that were provided and approved by the committee and council. Then those scores were averaged. And in order to apply the scores against the available budget, I used a weighting approach that was designed to take into account the average scores, the requested amount, and then apply it to how much money is available. And again, these are all just staff proposals, and it's really at the discretion of the committee. So the weighting factor is calculated by using the total score multiplied by the 2020 ask, divided by the sum of scores multiplied by the sum of asks. And it's kind of a complex way of coming up with weighting, but the normalization of weights includes the weighting factor divided by total weights multiplied by the available money. So that ensures that committee members' average scores were applied to the ask for the organization, and it also takes into account the proposed budget. So we'll skip ahead to the next slide. And you'll see that there is a column here for the weighting factor. I'll start at the beginning. So you'll see the organizations on the far left-hand column. We received a request from the Port Stanley Optimist for $3,264. Their average score was 75. Their weighting factor is 0.02. And the recommended allocation using the criteria on the previous slide is $1,684. Second stage housing, their average score was 89. Their ask was 10,000. Weighting factor was 0.07. And the recommended allocation is $6,123. STEAM Center, average score 87. Total ask 10,000. Weighting factor 0.072, and recommended allocation $5,985. Multi-Service Center, total score 87. Ask $3,205, and their weighting factor 0.023, and recommended allocation $1,918. And then 4-H, total score, average score 86. Their ask was 2,000, weighting factor 0.01, and recommended allocation 1,183. So you'll see the total of the recommended allocations does equal the middle column, which is the total of available funds. Mm-hmm. And you'll see the total of asks is 28,000. So this is the information that we've put forward to the committee. And at the request of the chair, you wanted to break it down by each organization. So I do have more information about how each of the categories were scored by committee members, which we can review with each one of the applicants. So back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I think if we deal with this particular page and have our comments and have our say through this one, and then we can move forward to the next group. Typically, as chair, I would often invite anyone else's comments before I'd offer my own comments, and I'm willing to do that and let anyone speak first if they wish.
Well, once again, obviously, Port Stanley, everybody had rated it the lowest of the other categories, significantly lower. I have a problem supporting the Port Stanley Optimist just because it's a service club, and I'm really apprehensive about opening the gates to service clubs.
David, any other comments? Okay, then. Okay,
Sorry.
so go, Dominique.
Mr. Chair, yeah, so a similar observation. I find that this organization doesn't provide a service per se, as was mentioned earlier. They provide funding to others who provide the service. So I find the eligibility be a little bit too borderline, and so hence I had given a low score.
Okay, thank you, Dominique. I'll jump in then with a comment. In my opinion, this is I agree with you. It isn't a service being offered here or proposed. It's the purchase of capital items. And according to our own eligibility criteria, we do not fund capital purchases. So in my mind, this one rated an extremely low score from me.
Have we got the option of eliminating it?
I believe we do.
Well, then I would move that, because I don't have a problem with any of the other ones. In fact, if we have some surplus, the 4-H, I know they've requested $2,000 for a number of years, and to bump them down to $1,183, I know they have a shoestring budget, and I would be in favor of bumping them up and eliminating the Port Stanley Optimist.
So I guess we can interpret that as a motion, Dave, if you're willing.
Certainly.
Okay, anyone willing to second that?
I will,
I-
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay. So then the motion would be to eliminate the Port Stanley Optimus request and then bump the, I believe, the Elgin 4-H up to the $2,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Moved by Dave and then seconded by Heather. And we'll deal with the surplus that's left after. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay. So all in favor of that?
Maybe a point of clarification before we vote. I guess my concern is that if we do that, so I'm in favor of eliminating, however, of eliminating the optimists. However, then if we bump 4-H to 2,000, it throws the rest of the calculation off. So what is our rationale for not applying the calculation to one organization, but applying the formula to other organizations? So I would like to do it one step at a time if we could, and then agree that we remove the optimists and then see. I would be interested in seeing what happens when the 1,600 is then applied to everybody else using the existing formula, or we have to review the formula.
All right, then I guess the referring it back to the mover of the motion, Dave, is that acceptable to you to take it back and just remove the one step at a time, or do you want to put the question as is on the floor?
Well, certainly if we will eliminate $3,264, it's going to bump everybody up.
Yep.
My fear is that if once all these organizations get the idea, okay, it's going to be based on a percentage of what you ask, I think you'll see them inflate the ask just because they know they're only going to get 50% of it. That is
Right.
my fear. Obviously, 4-H did not do that because they've literally for years have asked for $2,000. And I would certainly like to see them get that $2,000. So I'm going to stick with my original motion.
Okay.
Could I speak?
I assume that was you, Heather?
It's Sally. Could I? speak?
Sally?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I feel quite strongly about the 4-H one as well, and I agree with Dave. My immediate response was, well, if they're only going to get a certain percent of their thing, they'll ask for 3,000 next year to see if they can get the 2,000 or whatever.
Right.
And others certainly might very well do the same. The other thing is getting a certain percent. Like they scored very well, but getting a certain percent or a certain weighted score, weighted because of weighted factor, the people with the larger asks get a lot more money than the ones with the very minimal asks. And I have a hard time with some of that. So I'm just expressing that I also believe that the 4-H should get the 2,000, and then we would take the remainder and divide it among the others accordingly.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, any additional comments before I call the original question from moved by Dave and Heather?
Can I make a quick comment, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
If it was just putting the remainder of the 1684 after the whatever is needed to bump up the 4-H back into the middle column there, to go into the weighting for the remainder, would that solve the issue? I'm wondering, as opposed to putting the full total of the Port Stanley Optimist back into the pot, just putting the remainder back into the pot to be weighted out. I just wondered if that might solve the issue, but I'm happy with keeping my second in the motion.
Okay, Heather, I apologize because a lot of that was garbled on my end. Did the rest capture?
No,
Other
I had the
comments?
same problem.
Oh, couldn't hear.
Okay, let me change my microphone. Sorry, you know what, go on with my second and let me.
Okay. All right, then let's move on with that question then. All in favor?
Sorry, Councillor Jiguer,
No.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba,
Yes.
Heather Dirks.
Yes.
4-1, the motion is carried.
Okay, now, what's the balance of the, what's left in that budget then, Julie?
I need one quick second to
Yep.
do a quick calculation. $867.
So just to be clear, when you top up 4-H to $2,000, there's only $800 left? Okay,
That doesn't make sense, Julie.
Does.
If I could,
Yep.
could I just have one quick second?
We bumped them up by $800. It should leave $2,400.
no, we're in the wrong
No.
column, Dave. We gotta go to the recommended allocation.
No, it's from 1,600, so there's only 800 remaining.
867 is the exactly correct amount that Julie said.
Yeah.
So what is the committee's wish then to deal with that 867? Do you wish to allocate it over the remaining, what do we got, 1, 2, 3 applicants?
I think that's only fair. You do it on a pro rata basis, depending on what their percentage was.
Do you use the same weighting factor, Julie? Or just as the warden's suggesting, just prorate it?
We could prorate it, but it is worth pointing out that Second Stage Housing did receive the highest average score of all of the organizations. So I don't know whether the committee has any interest in giving them more funds as a result. I know when I reached out to a couple of other organizations to find out how they apply weighting criteria to grant programs, a couple of them did say that their first, second, and third choices, or those who scored the highest, do receive more funds, and then the others are prorated. So it's really at the discretion of the committee, but we could spread out the remainder based on the weighting factor, and that makes use of the committee scores. So that means Second Stage Housing would receive slightly more than STEAM and the Multi-Service Center.
Okay.
I think, sorry, Ed, I think they're all so close with 89, 87, 87 that I certainly would do the weighted factor. That makes sense because they're all, to me, I wouldn't favor one over another.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, I would move to divide equally between the three since we didn't use the full formula for 4-H. Then, and I agree that a difference of 86 to 89 in scoring is almost like no difference.
Okay, Dominique, so you're moving to distribute the remaining funds, the $867 equally amongst the 3 remaining applications?
Correct.
Okay, is anyone willing to second that?
I'll second it.
Thank you, David. Any other comments before the question's called? Then let's call the question. So it's moved by Dominique, seconded by David to divide equally the, I guess you could call it the surplus of program funds equally among the 3 remaining applicants, that being the second stage housing, the STEAM Center, and the Tillsonburg District Multi-Service Center. All in favor?
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes,
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah,
Yes.
Heather Dirks, Heather Dirks.
We have lost the connection.
Okay, 4-0, the motion is carried.
Okay, thank you.
I can tell you the grant allocations in, if I had 30 seconds.
Sure.
it's $289 in addition to each one.
Yes. So second stage housing, the recommended allocation, or, sorry, there's a bit of background noise, but the approved allocation is $6,412. STEAM Center, $6,274. Multi-Service Center, $2,207, and 4-H, $2,000, for a total of $16,894.
Okay. Julie, just one question, and I know we've already done this, and perhaps it's moot now, but by eliminating one of the applicants, it doesn't change the overall budget distribution between the 2, the festivals and grants, and or the festivals and the services programs, does it?
In theory, it should, but it didn't in
Yep.
this case because those funds were reassigned to 4-H.
Okay,
So,
all right.
I mean,
Thank you.
we could change the percentage of the total ask for that the first slide we showed you. But to keep it simple, I think it's a relatively low budget allocation for community services anyway. So I would recommend we just keep it at $16,894, remove
Okay.
the optimists, and then proceed with the funds as directed.
Okay, thank you. So shall we move on then with the festival and events?
Certainly.
Should we deal, are you going to deal with the seed one first?
We can skip ahead to that for sure. So you'll see that the Dutton Dunwich Economic Development Committee and Dutton Business Network proposed Dutton Night Market. Their ask was $10,000. Their average total score was 69. According to the formula, the funds available, $5,934, which means their weighting factor, since there were no other applicants in this category, was 1, and their recommended allocation is the $5,934.
Okay. Julie, the total program that they wanted to run was $9,898.50 in the application.
Yes.
Okay. So the ask, of course, was more than the criteria we were willing to do anyway. Typically.
Yes.
All right. And then the second question I have for you is, since this is a standing committee of the council of the Dutton and Dunwich, does it even qualify? Because we do not do governments or political parties.
That was my concern with this one.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed an odd ask.
I think it's a great initiative. Don't get me wrong. I'm just thinking that falls outside of the criteria of what the eligibility, what we've established for the festivals and events.
I also think this is a municipal effort rather than a county effort.
Mm-hmm.
I
Any
agree
oth-
that they do not meet the criteria. They're not a not-for-profit organization per se.
Okay, is Heather on the line or still not with us yet?
I'm here.
Okay. I don't know if you've heard some of the conversation that was going on regarding the Dunwich Economic Development Committee.
Yep.
Okay, do you tend to concur that this falls outside of the scope of the program that they asked?
I'm willing to take the rest of the committee's guidance on that one. I mean, this is my first year doing this, and I know there
Okay.
was conversation in the past about municipalities putting stuff forward, so
Yeah.
whatever you guys think on this one.
Okay, I'm going to propose, but I can't move it. It's up to the committee to do this, but I would almost propose that we reject this application and then reallocate the funds back into the festivals and events.
Yeah, I would.
So I need a mover who'd be willing to do that.
I will move that, Ed.
Okay, thank you.
I'm willing to second that.
Thank you, Sally. You'll second? Okay. Did you kind of catch the motion there, Julie, on the way by?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll call the question then. All in favor?
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Martin. Councillor Martin,
Yes?
thank you. Mr. Warden. Mr. Warden,
Yes.
thank you. Heather Dirks,
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
She read my mind.
Sorry, Councillor Ketchiba.
It's all right. You already called it. Let's, that's all right. Let's then go on back to the rest of the festival and event group. Do you need some time to recalculate that, Julie, or
I need about 30 seconds.
we can do that?
Okay, I think getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I'm all set.
Great.
So it looks slightly different from what's on your screen for the next ones, because the recommended allocation is bumped up to 53,172.
Mm-hmm.
Adding in the 10,000. So the weighting factors remain the same. It's really just a change in recommended allocation. So based on the average scores, Elmer Mural Project score was 78. Their ask was 10,000. Weighting factor 0.015. And the recommended allocation bumps up to $7,880. Bayham Beach Fest, average score 77. Total asks 10,000, weighting factor 0.014, and the recommended allocation is 7,779. Bayham Edison Fest, average score 74. Their ask was $1,500, weighting factor 0.002, and recommended allocation $1,121. Port Stanley Calypso, average score 73. Total asks $10,000, weighting factor 0.014, and recommended allocation 7,374. VON in the park, average score 89. Their ask was $1,500, weighting factor 0.0025, recommended allocation $1,349. The Plowman's Association, their average score 76, ask $250, weighting factor 0.00036, and their recommended allocation is 192. Periscope Playhouse, 74, average score. Their ask was 10,000, weighting factor 0.014, and their recommended allocation $7,475. Port Stanley Theater, average score 74. Their ask was 5,000, and their weighting factor 0.007. Recommended allocation 3,738. Wallacestown Ag, average score 77. Their ask was 10,000, weighting factor 0.0145, and the recommended allocation 7,779. And the Rodney Agricultural Society, average score 84. Their ask was 10,000, weighting factor 0.015, or sorry, 0.016, my apologies, and their recommended allocation 8,486 for a grand total of 53,172.
Okay, thank you. Any comments?
Yeah, I've got one, Ed, that a couple I'd like to bump up. I know we're supposed to be using a formula here, but I don't think I can look Alistair, I think his last name's McLean, in the eye when he's requested $250 when he's given 192. I just think that's cheap. So I would like to see at least the Plowman's brought up to $250. And the other one that really needs the money is the VON Seniors a Day in the Park. They've requested $1,500, and I'd like to see that at $1,500.
Thank you, David. Just for the record, I concur. I agree. And whatever comments the rest of the committee have.
I agree. I think the Plowmans have got the 250 for years. It's not a big ask, and they depend on the seniors one in the park. I mean, I know we agreed last year to give them the full, even though our scoring thing wasn't there, but I think they do a phenomenal job, and I really would like to see them. They do it entirely by donations, so I think that would be helpful.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think perhaps for a future year, since this is our first time using this criteria, we may want to revisit the formula. Sorry, Heather, can you mute for a second? Because I have really, there's something that appears to not be working in the formula, in my opinion, in terms of applying judgment and the impact of the event. For example, I had some concern about the Port Stanley Theater is one series that will, I think, is maxed at 200 people. And here we are sponsoring and granting $3,000 for 200 people. And we're not necessarily new patrons or perhaps already members. Equally, the Periscope Playhouse is not an event. They're applying for their entire bill for the year, which I started seeing some issues with our criteria. So I tried to reflect those concerns in the scoring in terms of eligibility and comparing. I also feel like that we're not applying judgment to the two, for example, Wollaston and Rodney. When you compare their financial statements, one appears to be run way more efficiently than the other, to the point of one now having a line of credit and still spending thousands and thousands in advertising for perhaps, similar results. So at what point, so for me to not apply some reward in terms of how efficiently they run their organization, how sustainable they are. So that's my overall observation. So I don't have a quick fix right now, but all this to say that I'm definitely in support of organizations that ask for so little and do so much, like the Vaughan and Plowman.
Thank you. Appreciate that. No, I agree with the comments made so far, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think most of us have tried to take in those particular factors that you mentioned, Dominique, when we've offered scoring. And this is just, that's why there's no more than just one decision maker on this, because we all have a little bit different view on things. I don't know how the committee feels on this, but I did have a bit of an issue with the ask from the Elmer and East Elgin Ag Society. It's not an event they want to do. They want to paint a mural. And does this fall within the criteria of what we're looking for? In my mind, no. Conversely, if we wanted to go down and compare it with Wallacestown, last year they wanted to fund the water line. We said no. But this year they want to fund, the event itself in terms of promotion, and that falls within the criteria as far as I'm concerned. So I respect whatever the committee feels on this one, but to me, I'm almost inclined to take out the Elmer Fair.
My only concern is with that, Ed, that the Elmer Fair usually applies to us for a grant for the fair itself. And I think this is just something that they're doing in addition to their normal costs. So it's too bad if, we cut them out entirely, just because I think we've always supported them to some extent in the past. So it's too bad if they've made an incorrect application in that sense. I mean, I understand your reasoning and I agree. It's not really an event or a festival, but the fair is itself. So I don't know. Do we just say no to them totally this year or what?
It's a good point, Sally, and I appreciate it. In the past, perhaps it wasn't last year, of course, but the year before, they used the money from the county to put up eaves troughs. Again, that's not an event, and that's kind of outside of the spirit of the program. But where do you draw a line? Again, I will respect the wishes of the committee here on this one.
I would include the Elmer Fair in with the same category as Rodney and Shedden and Wallacestown. They're all those agricultural fairs that need support, and I know that they've identified this project, but certainly they would be using their money somewhere else if it wasn't going to this project. So I would support them along with the other agricultural fairs.
Yeah, and I would agree. I found it at least innovative in terms of doing something new that will attract perhaps additional people who haven't been to the fair in a while. So since we're trying to cultivate a renewal, I felt that, perhaps they apply for the mural per se, but really to me, it's about running the festival as a whole. So it's a bit of a gray area. So I would strongly support them as well.
Okay. I seen Heather's hand up. I don't know where she went now.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I just, on my read of the Elmer Fair, the mural was intended to draw smaller social distance crowds to their premises throughout the season. And I understand that it's not specifically a festival or an event, but I do think that it's smart on their part, because nobody knows whether events and festivals are going to be held going forward into 2021 at this time. And I would just add my support to what the warden said about the Elmer being in with the Wallacestown and the other ones, because the other question I have is whether they understood really the new format of these applications, this being the first year of the 3 different streams, and they may have slotted it in where they thought it fit best. And maybe we should give them a little leniency on that, because it is a lot to read when you look through the applications for a small board. You're muted, Ed.
That was because I didn't have anything important to say. But now moving in retrospect, then going back to some earlier comments regarding the festivals, there was, I guess, consensus to top up the Plowman's allocation to $250 and the VON Seniors Day in the Park to $1,500. Since we're not taking anybody else out, that changes the allocation a little bit. So I guess the question then for the committee is this still the view that you'd wish to see happen? And if that's the case, we'd need a mover and a seconder and a vote.
Yeah, I would move exactly what you said, Ed, and we can rearrange those figures to take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you, David. Anyone willing to second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dominique. Julie, have you got that written down somewhere? And if so, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchba,
Yes.
Heather Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
So then the SERP or the remaining balance or applications, I guess, will have to be readjusted for the differences in those funds.
Yes.
Correct. So we would apply the formula to the other applicants and adjust VON in the park to 1,500 and Plowman's to 250.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, that's clear to me. Anything else you need on that festivals and grants scoring matrix then, Julie?
No, I think we're all set.
Okay, so then we move on the agenda to the correspondence.
What is the correspondence?
Okay, who wants to speak to this resolution?
We're just pulling it up now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to speak to this. On October the 9th, we received correspondence from Loyalist Township, who had sent information on to Prime Minister and the Premier, noting that a number of community groups and service clubs were affected by the pandemic, so advocating on their behalf. So we included it as correspondence just to bring it to your attention should you wish to recommend that council support a similar resolution. We'd be happy to coordinate that.
Okay, thank you for that. I am aware that the Minister of Agriculture had implemented some kind of funding for our agriculture societies, but this obviously is in addition to that. They're looking for funding for other such organizations. What's the view of the committee? Dominique?
I was trying to recall various announcements, and I believe there has been a fund, at least at the provincial level, announced to, and it's open right now for all festivals and events that were affected. That you can apply for funding to recoup some of your costs. And I think it's in 2 stages. So I guess I would want to look into that perhaps before endorsing this. I think this may have been acted upon.
Good point.
Great, we can certainly follow up on that.
I think that'd be best, Julie, and rather than the committee dealing with it at this point, if there's something that is already enacted, it could always come to council as an information piece. If action then needs to be taken and it hasn't done, then council could make the decision at that point.
Sounds great. We'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Date of the next meeting. Is there any urgency?
We're all
No,
done for 2021, right?
we are done for 2020. But for the first round of grant allocations, I guess I would just perhaps as new business, since the county is undertaking budget deliberations right now, I think the committee should think ahead to our planned second intake. So at this point, we will have fully expended the 2021 grant allocations. And so now would be the time, if the committee was going to request that county council consider additional funds for a second intake. I guess that business should be taken care of at this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Ed, Sally,
Hi, Sally.
is there any money, we have had the one sign request, which we've approved, but is there any money left in the sign budget, or is that it for 2021?
That's it. I believe that's the total grant package has been exhausted.
Correct.
And point of clarification, Sally, you remind me, did we as a committee approve the sign-in application?
Not per se.
No, so I guess maybe we'll need to fix that on the way out the door. So returning back to the new business on a second intake, what's your thoughts? Do we wish to approach council for a small set aside for 2021 for a second intake? Do you view the need, or do you think this is something that we could approach on a needed basis from an operational reserve or something?
I think it's going to be very COVID dependent. There may be,
I think you're right.
if COVID lifts, there may be someone who wants to do something, but it's very hard to predict.
Right. It certainly wouldn't be fair to put applications out there for a second intake and then not have funds to support it. So, it's something I think the committee needs to consider whether we even go down that avenue this coming spring. I'm not hearing a lot of interest, Julie. The second thing I wonder, which may actually determine the date of our next meeting, we are going to go through a round of, shall we say, asking for feedback on the application process. And I envision, will that take place February, March?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I guess we'd be looking to the committee for some direction here, but I recommend that when we send out confirmation of
Right.
grant allocations, that we request feedback at that time from the organizations, just on that first or the revised application process. And then we could schedule a meeting after that with the committee to review feedback received.
I think that sounds like a pretty good plan. Still, are my timelines a little too far in the future, or almost right? We're not
So
going
we
to fund
do,
it until February, right?
right. We need an approved budget for the corporation in order to assign these grants.
Right.
So February.
So we'd be looking at perhaps on the next meeting sometime, maybe March, April.
Yes.
All right. So backing up then a little bit, is there any interest in the committee then of perhaps asking for an allocation in the 2021 budget for a second intake in the spring of 2021?
I'm happy the way everything sits right now, man.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm not hearing anything contrary there, Julie, so I would assume there's no interest in pursuing a second intake, or at least budgeting for it.
Right. I would suggest that because the community is aware that there could be the second intake and we published that information, we could always bring the committee together if we hear that there is great interest, and the committee could strategize from there. So March, we could discuss whether anyone on the committee has heard feedback from the community about the need for a second intake.
Right.
Also based on circumstances at that time. A lot depends on the pandemic, so.
Okay, sounds like a plan. All right, then backing up, of course, we need to have a mover and a seconder to approve the signage application for the Periscope Playhouse.
I would move.
Okay. Seconder, please.
I'll second.
That was Dominique.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's Sally moves, Dominique seconds to approve the signage application for the Periscope Playhouse in the amount of $300. All in favor?
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Councillor Warden, or sorry, Mr. Warden,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah,
Yes.
Dr. Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
Perfect. So we've resolved then that the date of the next meeting could possibly be March, February, or March, April at the call of the chair. Does that work?
That's good.
Good. Okay. Anything else before this committee?
Mr. Chair, speaking of dates, I think it was at our last council meeting, I'm not sure, but I think there was a request from staff for each committee to try to map out all of the 2021 meeting dates.
You're correct.
Should we do that in March? Is that too late for staff, or what would be the recommendation?
That's a great point, Councillor Jiguer. And we did request that at the first meeting that takes place in 2021, that as many meetings as possible be scheduled. So that would definitely work. And the frequency of this committee, in terms of how often they meet, isn't a concern for our team. So I think we'll be able to come to the committee in March with a proposed framework for the scheduling of meetings for the next year and seek your approval at that time.
Does that work?
Thank you.
Works for me.
Thank you. Good. If there's nothing further, I would entertain a mover and a seconder to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll take Sally and then I will take David. All in favor?
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Warden,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchbaugh,
Yes.
Heather Dirks.
Yes.
5-0, the motion is carried.
Great. Thank you, everyone. See, we're 55 minutes ahead of schedule.
Take care,
This will
everybody.
die. Yep.
Have a